The cold vinyl of the diner booth felt brittle beneath Clara's worn-out jeans. She stared at the laminated menu, though she had no intention of ordering anything for herself. The prices swam before her eyes, each number a tiny accusation. In her purse, she had exactly $7.42. It was supposed to last until Friday, but her son, Leo, had other plans. His tiny stomach did not understand budgeting. Leo, strapped into the high chair beside her, let out a fretful whimper. He was only 2, his vocabulary limited, but his needs were crystal clear. His cheeks were flushed, his blue eyes glassy with the prelude to a full-blown tantrum. The last scoop of formula had been used that morning, a thin, watery mixture that had done little to satisfy him. "Sure, sweet boy," she whispered, her voice cracking. She slid the sugar dispenser across the table, a pathetic attempt at distraction. Just a little longer. Her phone buzzed with a notification from her bank. Low balance alert, $742. As if she needed the reminder. Humiliation burned in her throat, hot and acidic. She had worked 2 jobs, cleaned houses, and delivered groceries until her back ached. But a sudden flu had wiped out a week's pay and left them teetering on this precipice. She had one last, desperate option. A text to her estranged sister, a plea for $20. The thought made her stomach clench. It would come with a lecture, a cascade of pity and judgment she could not bear. But Leo's whimper was escalating into a cry, and pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. As she pulled out her phone, 2 men slid into the booth opposite hers. They reeked of stale cigarettes and cheap beer, their leering eyes raking over her with an unwelcome familiarity. "Well, look what we have here," the larger one said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "A pretty little thing all by herself." "Not quite by herself," the other one added, nodding toward Leo, who was now wailing in earnest, frightened by the loud voices. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She pulled Leo's high chair closer, creating a fragile barrier with her own body. "We were just leaving," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Now, don't be like that," the first man grinned, revealing a row of yellowed teeth. "We're just being friendly. Maybe you need some help with the kid." He reached a grimy hand toward Leo. Clara flinched back, shielding her son. "Don't touch him." Suddenly, a shadow fell over their table. A man stood there, tall and imposing in a perfectly tailored dark suit that seemed utterly out of place in the greasy spoon diner. His presence was a stark contrast to the grimy men, a sliver of obsidian in a room of faded pastels. His face was severe, with a sharp jaw and eyes the color of storm clouds. "Is there a problem here?" His voice was low and resonant, carrying an unmistakable authority that cut through the diner's clatter. The 2 men looked up, their bravado faltering. "This ain't your business, pal," the first one grumbled. The man in the suit did not even glance at them. His gaze was fixed on Clara, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. It was then that Leo, his face tear-streaked and red, stopped crying. He stared up at the stranger, his little brow furrowed. He lifted a chubby finger and pointed. "Daddy?" he asked, his voice small and hopeful. Then, looking at Clara, he pleaded, "Daddy, help her." The air froze. The 2 harassers snickered. Clara's face flooded with a heat so intense she thought she might faint. But the stranger's expression didn't change. He simply shifted his gaze to the 2 men, and the temperature seemed to drop several degrees. "I believe the lady asked you to leave," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was more menacing than any shout. "I won't ask again." There was a moment of tense silence, and then the 2 men, seemingly shrinking under his cold stare, scrambled out of the booth and shuffled out of the diner. The silence they left behind was deafening. Clara couldn't look at him. She focused on calming Leo, wiping his tears with a cheap paper napkin. "Thank you," she mumbled, her voice thick with shame. "It was nothing," the man replied. He slid into the booth where the others had been. A waitress appeared, her demeanor instantly changing from weary to attentive. "My associate and I will have coffee. And please bring a glass of milk and a bowl of oatmeal for the child. And for the lady," he paused, his eyes meeting hers for the first time, "whatever she'd like." Clara's head snapped up. "No, I can't. We were leaving." "Please," he said, and it wasn't a suggestion. "Allow me." She wanted to refuse. Her pride screamed at her to grab her son and run. But Leo had already quieted, watching the man with wide, curious eyes, and the mention of oatmeal had made her own stomach growl in betrayal. Defeated, she nodded mutely. The food arrived with astonishing speed. Leo devoured the oatmeal, his earlier distress forgotten. Clara watched him, a painful lump forming in her throat. This stranger, this impeccably dressed man, had done more for her son in 5 minutes than she had managed all day. "My name is Damien Sterling," he said, breaking the silence. The name was vaguely familiar, but her mind was too jumbled to place it. She just nodded. "Clara, and this is Leo." "He's a beautiful boy," Damien said, his gaze softening as he looked at Leo. The stern mask he wore seemed to crack for just a second, revealing a profound sadness underneath. It was there and gone so quickly, she thought she might have imagined it. When the meal was over, he paid the bill with a black credit card that the waitress handled as if it were a sacred relic. He then stood. "Allow me to give you a ride home. It's starting to rain." This was too much. "No, thank you. You've done more than enough." "It's no trouble," he insisted. "My car is right outside." Every instinct told her this was wrong, that men like him didn't do things like this without a reason. Men in suits that cost more than her rent didn't rescue women in diners out of simple kindness. But the rain was now beating against the diner window, and the thought of waiting for the bus with a tired toddler was exhausting. Against her better judgment, she agreed. His car was a sleek, black sedan with an interior that smelled of leather and wealth. A driver sat in the front, separated by a glass partition. Damien installed Leo's car seat, a cheap, second-hand model that looked shabby in the luxurious vehicle, with a practiced efficiency that surprised her. The ride to her rundown apartment complex was silent and tense. She gave the driver the address, feeling a fresh wave of humiliation as they pulled up to the crumbling brick building with its graffiti-scarred entryway. As she unbuckled a now-sleeping Leo, Damien spoke. "I have a proposition for you, Clara." Her blood ran cold. Here it was. The catch. "I'm not interested. I'm offering you a job," he said, ignoring her tone. "As my personal assistant. The pay is $100,000 a year, with a company apartment and full benefits." Clara stared at him, speechless. It was a joke. It had to be. "Why?" she finally managed to ask. "I saw your resume online," he said smoothly. "Your background in financial analysis is impressive. You were laid off from Gray and Sons 6 months ago. You're overqualified for the jobs you've been working since." The shock turned to ice in her veins. He hadn't just stumbled upon her. He had investigated her. This wasn't a chance encounter. It was a calculated interception. The kindness he had shown her now felt sinister, manipulative. "How do you know that?" she demanded, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and anger. "I make it my business to know things," he said simply. "The position is yours if you want it. My driver will give you my card. Call me when you've made a decision." With that, he was gone, the black car pulling away from the curb and disappearing into the rain, leaving her standing on the sidewalk with her sleeping child and a business card that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. For 2 days, she agonized. The offer was a lifeline, a fantasy made real, an escape from the crushing poverty that was suffocating her. But it was built on a foundation of deceit. He had lied to her, pretending their meeting was an accident. What else was he lying about? What did he really want from her? But every time she looked at Leo, every time she counted her pennies for a carton of milk, the choice became clearer. She didn't have the luxury of suspicion. She had to take the risk. On the 3rd day, with a trembling hand, she dialed the number on the card. The job was as real as he had promised. The company apartment was in a gleaming high-rise, a world away from her old life. It was spacious and modern, with a fully stocked kitchen and a bedroom for Leo, filled with toys he had only ever dreamed of. Her work was demanding but invigorating. She was good at it, her mind sharp and clear now that the constant hum of financial anxiety had been silenced. Damien was a formidable boss. He was exacting, brilliant, and emotionally distant. He treated her with a cool, professional respect that was almost more unnerving than open hostility. He never mentioned the diner, never referenced her past struggles. It was as if that desperate woman had never existed. But the suspicion lingered. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was a piece in a game she didn't understand. He was too kind, too helpful. He arranged for the best daycare for Leo. He advanced her salary without her asking when he learned her old landlord was illegally withholding her security deposit. These were not the actions of a mere employer. One evening, she was working late, finalizing a report in the quiet stillness of the executive floor. Damien was still in his office, a sliver of light visible under his door. Gathering her courage, she walked over and knocked. "Come in," he called. He was standing by the vast window that overlooked the city, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He looked tired, the iron control he usually maintained seeming to fray at the edges. "I need to ask you something," she began, her heart pounding. "And I need you to be honest with me." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Go on. Why me?" she asked, the words rushing out. "Why did you really help me? The story about my resume. I don't buy it. You had me investigated. You sought me out. I need to know why." He was silent for a long moment, swirling the liquid in his glass. The city lights reflected in his dark eyes. He looked not at her, but through her, at some distant, painful memory. "You're right," he said finally, his voice rough. "It wasn't a coincidence." He gestured to the chair opposite his desk, and for the first time, he looked vulnerable. He took a deep breath, as if bracing himself for a physical blow. "5 years ago," he began, his voice low and strained, "I had a wife, Elizabeth, and we had a son. His name was Thomas. He had just turned 2-inch. Clara sank into the chair, her own anger dissolving into a dawning sense of dread. "We were driving upstate to visit her parents. It was raining, much like the day I met you. A drunk driver ran a red light. The car was hit on the passenger side." He paused, his jaw tightening. "Elizabeth and Thomas, they didn't survive. I was the only one who walked away." The confession hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Clara felt the air leave her lungs. The profound sadness she had occasionally glimpsed in his eyes was now laid bare, a raw and gaping wound. "I saw you in that diner," he continued, his voice hoarse with unshed tears. "You were holding your son, trying to protect him, and for a split second, I saw her. I saw Elizabeth. And when Leo looked at me, he has the same blue eyes Thomas had." He finally met her gaze, and his was filled with a pain so deep it stole her breath. "I know it's not rational, but when those men approached you, something inside me broke. All I could think was that I couldn't fail again. I couldn't stand by and watch another mother and her child suffer when I had the power to stop it. I had all the money in the world, and it couldn't save my family. I thought maybe it could help yours." The truth was so much more devastating and selfless than anything she could have imagined. Her suspicion felt cheap and petty now. He wasn't a manipulator. He was a man haunted by ghosts, trying to find some semblance of redemption in a world that had taken everything from him. Tears welled in her eyes, tears of empathy for his unimaginable loss. "Damien," she whispered, her voice thick. "I am so sorry." That night, something shifted between them. The professional wall crumbled, replaced by a fragile, tentative connection. Trust began to bloom in the space where suspicion had taken root. She saw him not as her powerful boss, but as a man carrying an unbearable burden. And he, in turn, began to see her as more than a project, more than a ghost of his past. Clara threw herself into her work with a new sense of purpose. She wasn't just earning a paycheck. She was helping the man who had saved her. Her financial acumen was sharper than ever. As she delved deeper into the quarterly reports for a major upcoming merger, she started noticing things, small discrepancies, odd fund transfers, numbers that didn't quite add up. Initially, she dismissed them as clerical errors, but they were consistent, forming a subtle pattern of deception. A trail of money was being siphoned from a subsidiary account into an offshore holding company. It was clever, almost untraceable, but she had always had a knack for finding the loose thread. She brought her findings to Damien. He listened intently, his face hardening into a granite mask as she laid out the evidence. The account in question was overseen by one person, Marcus Thorne, a senior vice president and Damien's chief rival within the company. "Marcus has been with the company for a decade," Damien said, his voice grim. "He's ambitious, ruthless. I always knew he resented me for getting the CEO position after my father retired." "This is more than resentment," Clara said, pointing to a specific transaction. "He's stealing millions. And with the merger, he could disguise it completely, or even leverage it to sabotage the deal and make a play for your job. The external threat was no longer theoretical. It was real, and it had a name. Damien launched a quiet, internal investigation, with Clara at its center. They worked late into the nights, poring over encrypted files and financial records, their professional collaboration deepening their personal bond. In those hushed, late-night hours in the office, they talked about more than just numbers. He spoke more of Elizabeth and Thomas, and she spoke of her struggles, of her fierce, all-consuming love for Leo. Marcus must have sensed the net closing in. He grew paranoid, his behavior erratic. One evening, Clara returned to her office to find her computer had been tampered with. Files were corrupted, and a fake email, seemingly from her, had been sent to the merger committee, leaking falsified, damaging information about Sterling Industries. She had been framed. Panic seized her. "He's trying to discredit me," she told Damien, her voice trembling. "He knows I'm onto him." "He's not just trying to discredit you," Damien said, his eyes blazing with a cold fury she had never seen before. "He's trying to intimidate you, to threaten you. That ends now." The climax came at an emergency board meeting called to address the leak. Marcus sat at the long mahogany table, a smug, confident look on his face. He presented the fabricated email as proof of Clara's incompetence and treachery, suggesting she was a corporate spy. "Miss Evans is a recent hire with a checkered past," Marcus said smoothly, his voice dripping with condescension. "It's clear she was planted here to sabotage this merger." The board members murmured, their gazes turning to Clara with suspicion. She felt the familiar sting of judgment, of being seen as small and untrustworthy. But then she felt Damien's hand briefly squeeze her shoulder, a silent message of support. When Marcus was finished, Damien stood. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The quiet authority in his tone commanded the room. "Thank you for your presentation, Marcus," he said calmly. "It was illuminating. But you've made one critical error." Damien nodded to Clara. Taking a deep breath, she stood and connected her laptop to the main screen. "While Mr. Thorne was busy fabricating emails, I was tracing the source of the financial drain he's been orchestrating for the past 18 months. On the screen, a complex web of transactions appeared. With calm, clear precision, Clara walked the board through the entire scheme. She had not only uncovered the embezzlement, but had also found the digital breadcrumbs Marcus had left behind. She showed them the IP address from which the fake email was sent, an address that traced back to a terminal in Marcus's own office. The final piece of evidence was an audio recording from a security camera near her desk, capturing Marcus's voice as he coerced a junior IT technician into helping him. The room was silent. Marcus's face had gone pale, his smugness evaporating into pure, unadulterated panic. He lunged to his feet, his eyes wild. "She's lying. This is all a fabrication," he roared, pointing a shaking finger at Clara. He took a step toward her, his face contorted with rage. Before he could take another, Damien moved between them, shielding her completely. He was a solid, immovable wall. "It's over, Marcus," Damien said, his voice like ice. "Security is on its way." As security guards escorted a sputtering, defeated Marcus from the room, the board erupted in a flurry of apologies and commendations. But Clara barely heard them. All she could see was Damien, who had turned back to her, his eyes filled with a potent mix of relief, pride, and something deeper, something that made her heart ache with hope. That night, after the chaos had subsided, they stood together in his office, the city lights twinkling below like a fallen constellation. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind an emotional clarity that was impossible to ignore. "You were incredible today," Damien said softly. "We were," she corrected him. "We did it together." He stepped closer, his hands coming up to gently cup her face. "Clara," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "When I saw him coming at you, I realized something. This started because you and Leo reminded me of what I lost. But somewhere along the way, it stopped being about my past. It started being about you. About my future." Tears streamed down her face, but for the first time in a long time, they were tears of joy. "Damien," she breathed. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Clara Evans," he confessed, his thumb stroking her cheek. "I think," she replied, a watery smile spreading across her face, "I'm already in love with you, Damien Sterling. He closed the small distance between them and kissed her. It was a kiss that held all the pain of his past and all the promise of their future, a kiss that sealed the bond forged in a grimy diner and tempered in a corporate boardroom. It was a kiss that felt like coming home. 1 year later, the city lights still glittered outside the penthouse apartment window, but now they were just a backdrop to the warm glow inside. The apartment was filled with the sounds of laughter and the cheerful chaos of a child's birthday party. Leo, now a boisterous 3-year-old, tore the wrapping paper off a new toy truck, his face alight with pure joy. Clara, now the chief financial officer of Sterling Industries, watched him, her heart so full she thought it might burst. Damien came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. He was smiling, a genuine, easy smile that reached his eyes, chasing away the last of the shadows that had haunted them for so long. "He's happy," Damien murmured into her ear. "We all are," she replied, leaning back against his chest. She wore a simple, elegant dress, and on her left hand, a diamond ring sparkled, a promise of a lifetime together. Their life was a world away from what it had been. They were a family, built not on blood, but on a chance encounter and a shared desire to heal. She looked around the beautiful room, at the man she loved and the son who was her entire world, and she thought back to that desperate, humiliating day in the diner. It was strange how life worked. Her lowest point, the moment she thought she had lost everything, had been the beginning of her salvation. A wrong turn had led her to the perfect destination.